Okay, today's lesson is lesson number 86. We're going to talk about angles that are in standard position. Okay, so we've got a little bit of vocab today, but overall this lesson is pretty easy. It should remind you back to concepts you talked about in geometry again. So we're going to expand what we've been talking about angles, and instead of just sticking to like 30 degrees, 45 degrees, or even 90 degrees, we're going to go beyond that and talk about up to a full rotation. So think about if you're like doing a trick or in snowboarding or on a bike and you turn all the way around, like make a full rotation. It's called a 360, right? So that's going all the way around here. And we have 180 would be going halfway around, and so on. So here's our basic kind of a diagram that we're going to go off of. So an angle is in standard position, we say, when it's starting at the x-axis here. Okay, so we call this the initial side, and we measure the angle from the initial side to the terminal side. Okay, so terminal, kind of like terminate, it's where the angle ends. Okay, and then we measure the angle. If it's a positive angle, we go counterclockwise, like the one that's drawn here. Or clockwise would be a negative angle. So if we were to go this way, kind of the smaller angle here, that we would measure with negative degrees. Okay, also another little piece of vocab for today over here. We call angles coterminal if they have the same terminal side. So in this drawing here, let's say this positive angle was 235 degrees and the negative one here was or if this was let's say 240, and then the negative here was negative 120 degrees, those would be coterminal angles, okay, because they both start and end at the same place. You can also think of it as they add up to 360 if you ignore the negative, okay, so the value, or like the absolute value of the angle, they add up to 360 here. Alright, so let's look at some examples. Okay, if you're asked to measure an angle, first, these are kind of the guidelines that we're going to be using. So starting up here with this graph, we start at the x-axis as our initial side and then ending at the positive y-axis. This is an angle we are familiar with, right? It's a right angle, so it's 90 degrees. If we go another 90 degrees beyond that, so think of this as a right angle as well, we keep going around so that we're facing the other way now. That's going to be 180 degrees. Okay, and then if we go 3 quarters around, so 1 right angle, 2 right angles, 3 right angles, now we're 90 degrees more than 180. So this is 270 degrees. And like I was saying earlier, like in a lot of sports tricks, if you go all the way around, if you make a full rotation, they're called a 360. This one here, then, this angle is 360 degrees. Okay, so we're going to use these as our guidelines for measuring and for drawing angles. So if I asked you to draw a 45-degree angle, you know that it would be right in the middle of 90 degrees. Okay, so here are some examples. Okay, these are kind of how they would be given to you. So for number 1, it's asking for this angle that's marked in red. Okay, and it tells you that this section right here, there's 20 degrees between the positive y-axis and this ray, or this piece of the angle. So if this whole thing I know is 90 degrees, I'm going to subtract off that 20 to get my answer for this angle, which would be 70 degrees. Okay, I am over here on number 2. This is going clockwise, so remember, if I'm going clockwise, it's going to be a negative angle. And I could think, okay, if I go all the way to the negative x-axis, that would be 180 degrees, but this part that's marked off in green says 100. So it's 100 degrees short of 180, so this would just be negative 80 degrees. Okay, And then 3 and 4 students did on their iPads. So for number 3, thinking of this entire rotation, if we were to go halfway around, it would be 180. So 40 degrees back from that gives us 140 here. I could also think about what's the coterminal angle here. So what's the angle represented by this green arrow? And again, I would think, okay, well, what adds to 360? That would be 220, and it's negative because it's going clockwise. Okay, so that could be a coterminal angle. All right, over at number 4, this is going to be a negative angle because it's going clockwise, and it's 60 degrees short of negative 90, so this would be negative 30 degrees. Okay, and I could think of the coterminal angle here as well. This one would be positive, and in order to make the values add to 360, I would have to have this be positive 330 degrees. Okay. And last couple examples here. If I'm going all the way except I'm 30 degrees short of a full rotation, then that would be 330 degrees. And over here, this is going to be negative again because it's clockwise. It's 160 degrees short of 180, so this would be negative 20 degrees. Okay, see how I'm using those, the quarter rotations as kind of my guides, right? So I know this whole thing would be negative 180. So since this is marked as 160, I know that what's left must be 20. Okay, and again, negative because it's measuring clockwise. All right, for these examples, we're drawing angles now. So we're given the angle that it wants us to draw. This one is 65 degrees. So I know I'm going to start with my initial side here because it says to draw the angle in standard position. So my initial side is there. And I'm thinking that if I were to go all the way up to here, that would be 90 degrees, so I don't want to go quite that far. But if I kind of split this into 3 pieces, maybe evenly, to 3 pieces, I know that each one of these is 30, right, because this whole thing is 90. So if I were to go 2 of those, that would be 60, so I just need to go a little farther than that. So right about here would be my 65 degrees, and I should probably mark it off like this. Okay, you want to make sure to include your arrow so that the reader knows that you're going counterclockwise. You're not talking about this big angle here. That would have a different measure. Okay, for negative 235, again, I start on the positive x-axis, and since it's negative, I'm going to be going clockwise. If I were to go all the way to the positive y, this would be negative 270. If I were to just stop here, that would be negative 180, so I know I'm going to be somewhere in between. Again, this is negative 270, so that means I need to go 35 degrees back, right? I don't need to get quite all the way to negative 270. So I would draw my terminal side like this, and I would make sure to mark that it's this angle so that people don't think I'm talking about the small angle in here. Alright, and I could also figure out what that small angle is. That would be a coterminal angle. I know that I went 35 back from negative 270, so if I add this 90 plus that 35, I end up with 125 as the coterminal angle there. Okay, a couple more examples. Drawing, so negative 50 degrees, I know that's going to be right about in between negative 0 degrees, and then this would be negative 90, right? So I want to be right about in the middle there, which would be right here, so that's negative 50. And then for 210 degrees, I know I need to go 30 degrees more than 180. And this whole box represents 90, so I want to go about a third of the way. So I went about 30 degrees more than 180 to show a measurement of 210 degrees. Okay, and I could find the coterminal angles here again. Since this is negative 50, this one would be 310 degrees. They add to 360 then, right, if I'm just talking about the value. Over here, negative measure would be negative 150, so that these would add to 360. Okay, and that's it for today. So go ahead and work on these for homework, and I will see you guys tomorrow. Thanks.